What do we need to learn about heroes and battles from 1200 BC? Well, not only is the Trojan War the backstory to Homer's Odyssey, the events of the Trojan War have inspired artists and writers throughout the centuries. In fact, there is no one definitive text on the Trojan War. The stories I'm going to share with you today have been amassed from hundreds of secondary sources. Since these stories are so old, keep in mind that we have limited primary sources and proof as to the validity of these events. Think of this as the original telephone game. You tell a person a story, which gets passed from one person to the next, and soon the story's changed and completely blown out of proportion. So I refer to the Trojan War as unverified history. We know some of it is true, but because archaeological evidence has been lost or destroyed throughout the ages, there is only some conclusive proof. The setting of the Trojan War is Bronze Age Greece, about 1200 BC. So keep in mind that while we refer to the Greeks as Greeks, back then they did not think of themselves as such. The Greeks thought of themselves as individual city-states and regions. So like the Athenians thought of themselves as the Athenians, the Ithacans, they were each an individual group. But for us, it's too confusing for modern audiences. So we just lump them all together and call them the Greeks. Our stories are going to focus on the following locations: Ithaca, the home of Odysseus; Sparta, the home of Menelaus and Helen; the islands of Skyros and Tenedos; and of course, the city of Troy. Now, during this time period, the Greeks and Trojans did not have a good relationship, as they constantly fought for power and wealth. In fact, the real-life cause of the war is rather boring. The city of Troy is situated on a prime piece of property. This waterway here is the Dardanelles, which connects the Aegean and Mediterranean seas to the Black Sea and Asia, and was a very important trade route. Travel over land was too treacherous and slow. So Greece, Thrace, and the surrounding areas is also a very rocky region, and it was lawless. So traveling over land was not an effective method. Folks were often attacked, and so it was much easier to transport goods on water. So knowing the importance of this trade route, the Trojans would charge travelers a toll for sailing through. This made the Trojans very rich. So the real-life boring cause of the Trojan War is simply this: the Greeks wanted control of the trade route. So to tell you a bit more about the city of Troy and how important it was, the gods Apollo and Poseidon were punished by Zeus to work among men, and they helped build the city. Also, the city is built on the same spot where Athena's sacred statue, the Palladium, fell from the heavens. You will see that Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, has a very specific epithet: Pallas Athena, Pallas. Now, when Athena was a young lass of a goddess, she would often spar or play fight with her best friend, a mortal girl by the name of Pallas. Well, one day, being a goddess and extra special powers, Athena accidentally killed her best friend. So distraught over the death, Athena did two things. One, she took her best friend's name as her own, and henceforth she would be known as Pallas Athena. And two, she built a statue, the Palladium, in honor of her best friend. Now, for whatever reason, Athena dropped the statue from the heavens and it landed on the spot where Troy was to be built. And prophecy states that as long as the statue remains within the walls of Troy, the city will never fall. This city must be special to have such connections to the gods. Now, while we know that the gods and goddesses are not real, we do have conclusive proof that there really was a city of Troy. A German archaeologist by the name of Heinrich Schliemann discovered the ruins of Troy in what is modern-day Turkey. By close reading the text of the Iliad, Schliemann was able to use context clues to locate the site. The city of Troy is real! So, what does all of this information tell us about the city of Troy? It was a mythical and epic task to build. So, it would be a mythical and epic task to destroy it. By glorifying their enemies and making them seem super strong, The Greeks will be that much better than the Trojans when they destroy the city. Also, since I'm a nerd, and I think this is pretty cool, literature can be used to solve real-life mysteries. Who knew close reading a text could make you famous? Taking a look at the city, the most prominent feature is the walls. It takes the Greeks 10 years to breach the walls of Troy. But keep in mind, they weren't fighting every day for those 10 years. Ancient warfare is a bit different from modern warfare, focusing on acts of heroism by individuals who represent their region. So a typical day of fighting would look like this. A Greek hero and his band of soldiers would come out from their camp on the beach, and they would face off in this area against a Trojan hero and his band of soldiers who came out from the city. They would fight, a winner would be declared, prize distributed, and then they would go back to their respective camps. Sometimes the battles were more involved and deadly, but for the first half of the Trojan War, it was like an extended boys' camping trip. A lot of fun. Now, the mythological cause of the war begins in a very unlikely place, the antithesis of war, love. And the origins of the Trojan War can be traced all the way back to a wedding. The wedding of Peleus, a mortal man, a Greek hero, and Thetis, a lesser goddess. It was not customary for the gods to marry mortals, but in this case, Zeus made an exception. Prophecy said that whomever Thetis had a child with, that child would grow up to be greater than his father. If you will recall, Zeus came into power by overthrowing his father, Kronos. So to protect his reign as king of the gods, Zeus had to make sure no god had a child with Thetis. So to ensure that she was off the market, Zeus threw an elaborate wedding feast and invited all the gods. Well, okay, all the gods except one. The goddess you do not want to have at your wedding is Eris, the goddess of discord. You want your cake to burn, your wedding dress to rip, it to rain, everything that could go wrong, Eris will make sure it does. Now, of course, Eris finds out that everyone has been invited to this wedding except for her, and she decides to crash the party. And usually when Eris stirs up trouble, she is very theatrical. But in this case, she decides to be more subtle and appeal to the sensibilities of the gods. Now, something you have to understand is that the gods are anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic. Unlike the god of Catholicism, Christianity, Judaism, the ancient Greek gods were not all knowing, benevolent, supreme beings. They were anthropomorphic, meaning they acted just like humans with all the positive and negative human qualities. They just had extra special powers. So to cause trouble at the wedding, Eris proposes a beauty contest. Arriving at the wedding feast, she places on the banquet table a beautiful golden apple, on which is inscribed the Greek word Kalliste, which means for the fairest. Oh, this should sound familiar. Snow White ate a poisoned apple because the witch wanted to be the fairest of them all. What about some other famous apples? We have the apple from Adam and Eve, who after eating it got kicked out of the paradise. Heck, I'm sure your Apple iPhones may have caused you to get in trouble in class. There's also that old adage, one bad apple spoils a bunch. But not all apples are bad, because we also do know this statement. An apple a day keeps the doctors away. So Eris's beauty contest, in mythology, this is called the Apple of Discord, and it causes quite a ruckus at the wedding, because the three most powerful goddesses, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, think that each of them should be the fairest of all. They want Zeus to judge the contest. Now, Zeus isn't a dummy. He knows that this is a no-win situation. If he picks his wife Hera, his daughters Athena and Aphrodite will be mad. If he picks one of his daughters, his wife and the other daughter will be mad. He can't pick, but he knows of just the person to be the judge. Now, before I tell you what happened with the beauty contest, I have to backtrack and tell you the story of the mortal man Zeus finds to be the judge. Paris is the son of King and Queen Hecuba, King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy. When his mom, Hecuba, was pregnant with Paris, she dreamt that she would give birth to a flaming torch. Ouch, that burns. And when he was born, his crazy sister Cassandra, who had the gift of foretelling the future, predicted that he would destroy the city, burning it to the ground. Now, wanting to protect his throne and city, King Priam knew he had to get rid of Paris. But if he were to actually kill his infant son with his own hands, Priam would be punished by the gods. So he did what anyone in ancient societies have done to get rid of unwanted children. He abandoned the infant Paris in the woods on Mount Ida, where Paris will die of exposure, dehydration, or starvation. But you and I know what usually happens in such cases. The baby's always saved and is raised by strangers. So along comes a shepherd who, having of course been influenced by the gods, Zeus, finds the infant Paris and raises him as his own. Now, despite his true origin, Paris grew up always feeling a bit different from his sheep-herding family. Paris detested manual labor and his poor living conditions. He could often be found out in the fields, sleeping under a tree, rather than tending to the flock. And it was on one such day, when Paris was around 18 years old or so, that Zeus, poof, appears and asks him to judge the beauty of the contest of the gods. Not wasting a second, Paris, of course, agrees to go with Zeus to Mount Olympus. Now, this episode of mythology is known as the Judgement of Paris, where he must choose between one of the three goddesses as the fairest of them all. Being anthropomorphic, each goddess tries to bribe Paris. Hera, Zeus's wife and sister, steps up, and she says, "If you choose me, I will give you ruling power over the entire world." Paris couldn't control a flock of sheep. You think he wants the responsibility of ruling the world? Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, steps up next, and she says, "If you pick me, I will make you the greatest military general of all time. You will vanquish your enemies." Come on, this kid is so stinking lazy. Do you think he wants to fight in battles? So choosing a different tactic, Aphrodite steps up, and she offers, "If you pick me, I will give you the most beautiful mortal woman in the whole world." Hey, that sounds more like it. So here is one of our secondary sources for this tale. This vase is an example of black figure pottery. This has nothing to do with race or the color of one's skin. This type of pottery is named black figured because of the color of the clay that was used. Pictured here are the three goddesses. I know that this is Athena in the middle because she is always depicted wearing a helmet and carrying a spear. I know that this one is Hera because she outranks the other goddesses and would be first in line, which leaves Aphrodite to be the last. I know that this one here is Paris in the middle because he has the hat and the shepherd's crook, and then this one sitting on the throne would of course be Zeus. Okay, here's another depiction from a Dutch artist, 1677. This is also called the Judgement of Paris, and you can see up here in the top corner, you can see the gods at the banquet and Helios with his chariot. You can see Hermes here with his winged hat, Paris in the middle with his shepherd's clothing. Here is Athena with the helmet on her head. And this I know is Hera because of her crown and the peacock seated next to her, which was her sacred bird. And being handed the apple by Paris is Aphrodite, being crowned also the winner by Cupid. So, who did Paris pick as the fairest of them all? It was Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Do you remember what his prize was? Ah, yeah, the hottest mortal woman in the world. Now, if the gods offer you a prize and it seems too good to be true, it probably is, because there is always a catch. And boy, do these gods like to stir up trouble. Paris's prize from Aphrodite is a woman by the name of Helen. And the catch is, she's already married. She is married to the king of Sparta, Menelaus. Now, before I can tell you about Paris claiming his prize, I gotta tell you Helen's backstory. So, Helen was raised by King Tyndareus and a woman by the name of Leda. And while King Tyndareus is recognized publicly as her father, her real biological father is Zeus. This episode of mythology is called Leda and the Swan. One day, Leda, King Tyndareus' queen, was down by the duck pond feeding the various swans and ducks when she caught Zeus's eye. And if you recall, Zeus is a notorious ladies' man, often cheating on his wife Hera. So Zeus changes his form into a swan and approaches Leda. She's so captivated by this friendly swan when suddenly, poof, Zeus appears. And he has his way with her. And as he always does when he cheats, he impregnates the woman. And Leda becomes pregnant. Now, at the same time that Leda becomes pregnant with Helen, she's also pregnant with her husband's daughter. So suspend your disbelief for a moment. There are 2 babies in the womb. This one belly, but each baby has a different daddy. Other stories say that Helen was born from an egg. Crazy, right? Wow, this is Greek mythology. After the babies are born, it becomes evident that they are not identical twins. Helen grows up to be gorgeous, and her twin sister Clytemnestra is not. In fact, Clytemnestra is often jealous of all the extra attention Helen receives. Now, King Tyndareus cared for both girls, and when they became a marrying age, he knew they would be key in securing strong alliances for Sparta. However, he had trouble publicizing who he wanted the girls to marry. You see, when Helen and Clytemnestra became of marrying age, all of the Greek heroes showed up in Sparta asking to marry Helen. Poor Tyndareus was in a bit of a pickle. If he chose one hero over another, the rest of the suitors could align together and make war on Sparta. Now, it was Odysseus, though, who provided a solution to Tyndareus' dilemma. Odysseus knew he had no shot at getting Helen. He wasn't rich or powerful enough, and some say Odysseus, who was quite muscular, looked more regal sitting down than standing, for he had short legs and a great barrel chest. Trying to picture Odysseus, I often think he would look like modern-day Principal Wilhelm. So Odysseus approached King Tyndareus and said, I have a solution, but in return, I want to marry Penelope, King Icarius' daughter of Ithaca. King Tyndareus agrees to make it so. Odysseus proposes that they sacrifice a horse to the gods, chop up the horse into little pieces, and make each of the suitors stand on a piece of the horse, swearing an oath that they will defend the marriage of Helen to whomever Tyndareus chooses. And that if anyone were to try and tear the marriage apart, they would arise and attack the rival. And that's just what they do. They sacrifice the horse, chop it up into little pieces, every man stands on a piece of the horse and swears an oath to protect the marriage of Helen to whomever Tyndareus chooses. Odysseus' solution becomes known as the Oath of Tyndareus, which solved the immediate problem, but as you will soon see, has far-reaching, unintended repercussions. Anywho, King Tyndareus chooses a pair of brothers to marry his daughters. Menelaus marries Helen, and Clytemnestra marries Menelaus' brother Agamemnon. Helen and Menelaus become the new king and queen of Sparta, and Clytemnestra and Agamemnon rule over Mycenae. And they all live happily ever after. Well, until one day, Paris arrives in Sparta. After choosing Aphrodite as the winner of the apple, she reveals to Paris that he is the long-lost Prince of Troy. And before she lets him claim his prize, she takes him back to Troy to reunite with his family. Paris competes in a bunch of athletic games, and catching the eye of the king and queen, Aphrodite orchestrates it so that Paris's true identity is revealed. Can you imagine that family reunion? Yikes! Oh, I'm so sorry we abandoned you in the woods, honey. Please don't destroy the city. So, wanting to make up for their faux pas of abandoning Paris, and of course to get him out of the city so that he won't accidentally burn it down, they send Paris as a royal ambassador to the city of Sparta to talk about trade routes. How convenient. Even more convenient, when Paris gets to Sparta, Menelaus is away attending a funeral in Crete. Paris and Helen connect, and he whisks her away to Troy. Now, this episode of mythology is known as the Rape of Helen. But the question is, does Helen go willingly, or is she forcibly kidnapped? The modern English word rape comes from the Latin word rapio, which means to seize or take. So literally, Paris takes Helen, but the sexual connotations are unclear. Keep in mind, her marriage to Menelaus wasn't of her own choosing, and Menelaus is arrogant and older than her. So it doesn't seem that big of a stretch for a pretty girl such as Helen to want to be with a young hot guy as Paris. That movie, Troy, uses this storyline that Helen wanted to go, but other stories have varying details. And this is a question that will never be conclusively answered. Now, finding out that Helen has been taken by Paris to Troy, Menelaus tries diplomacy. He and Odysseus go to Troy and nicely ask if Helen will be returned. The Trojans refuse for whatever reason, and so Menelaus then invokes the oath of Tyndareus and calls upon the other Greek heroes to help him get his wife back. Helen becomes an excuse to start war because, as you already know, the Greeks just wanted to control the trade route. Menelaus' motivation here has little to do with love and has everything to do with power and money. Now, all of the Greek warriors know that this isn't really about getting Helen back. They recognize that Menelaus is using Helen as an excuse and is going to try to make the Greek warriors do his dirty work for him. It has been years since the Greek warriors swore the oath of Tyndareus, and at this point, most of them are satisfied with their lives. But in the ancient Greek world, you cannot go back on an oath, so Menelaus begins gathering the Greeks for war. Odysseus, as the current king of Ithaca, has been happily married to Penelope, and on the day that Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon arrive in Ithaca to call him to war, Odysseus' first and only son is born. There is no way Odysseus wants to leave, and he tries to trick them into thinking he is insane and cannot go to war. Now, knowing that Menelaus and Agamemnon are coming, and there's also a prophecy that states if Odysseus goes off to war, he will not be home for 20 years. Odysseus hatches a plan to get out of going. He dresses in rags and wears a hat made out of eggshells on his head. He yokes to his plow a donkey and an ox, which is very uncustomary. And rather than plowing his field in a linear and orderly fashion, Odysseus erratically races around the field. And also, to prove that he is crazy, instead of sowing seeds in the ground, Odysseus throws down salt. Salt will ruin your soil and make it impossible for crops to grow. Keep in mind that Ithaca is a rocky island with little farmland, and being the king of Ithaca, Odysseus has the best farmland. He must be crazy if he is ruining it. The men try to stop Odysseus, but Odysseus refuses to heed, and he even tries to run them over. Now, in the crowd watching all of this is a man by the name of Palamedes, who, by the way, is no friend or a pal of Odysseus. Palamedes knows that Odysseus is too smart to be crazy, so he decides to call Odysseus's bluff. Palamedes goes over to Penelope, who is standing there with her infant son Telemachus, and he takes the baby out of her arms. He places the infant in the path of the plow. If Odysseus is truly crazy, he will run his son over, killing his heir to the throne. If he is not, he will swerve or stop. Odysseus realizes that his bluff has been called, and unable to kill his son, he stops and admits defeat. But don't think Odysseus has forgotten Palamedes. Odysseus will get his revenge on Palamedes when the time is right. So, speaking of that movie of Troy, which, by the way, most of it is inaccurate, there is something that the movie Troy did get right. So what did it get right? Well, casting Brad Pitt as Achilles. It is well documented that Achilles was hot, and casting Brad Pitt, a hot actor, is definitely a good call. So before I can tell you about Achilles' role in the war, I need to tell you his backstory. And as you're probably recognizing, in Greek mythology, there's always a prophecy. Achilles' prophecy states that he will either live a long and boring life, or he will die valiantly in battle at an early age, and his name will live on throughout the ages. Since we're talking about him today, spoiler alert, I bet you can guess what happened. Knowing her son's probable proclivity for fighting, Achilles' mother, Thetis, protected him by dipping him in the river Styx. The river Styx is a magical but treacherous river that separates our world from the underworld. Thetis holds the infant Achilles, here as you can see in this picture, and dips him in the river Styx, making him invincible in all but one spot, his heels. Now, I don't know why she didn't spin him around, held him by the hands, and dunk him back in, but I guess he can't double dip, the river Styx. Well, fast forward to the gathering of the Greeks for war. Menelaus and Agamemnon knew they couldn't win the war without Achilles. But Achilles wasn't interested in fighting for Menelaus. So Achilles tried to get out of going, and he chose a really good hiding place for a hot young guy. Achilles decided to hide at the court of Skyros, an island known for their hundreds of beautiful women. And the fashion during this time was long, flowy dresses and veils, so it was easy for Achilles to hide by covering up and fading into the crowd. Now keep in mind the timing of all of these events. This is Bronze Age Greece, so communication and travel took a very long time. So while I'm telling you these stories in order, there's months, if not years, between events occurring. So Achilles was hiding out for quite a while when the Greeks finally arrived at Skyros, hiding for so long that he was able to seduce one of the women, and they had a son named Neoptolemus. Just remember him as Neo. Now Menelaus, Agamemnon, Odysseus, and the other Greek warriors had gotten word that Achilles was hiding on the island of Skyros. But when they got there, they couldn't find him. So Odysseus came up with a trick to flush him out. In the center courtyard of the palace, Odysseus placed a heaping mound of dresses and veils, and among them he placed a shield and a spear. The women came out of the palace rooms and started happily picking through the pile, ignoring the shield and the spear. And just outside the entrance to the courtyard, Odysseus had his men clash their shields and weapons together, raising an alarm as if the palace was being attacked. The women hear the alarm, shriek, "Ah!" and go running back into the palace, all except for one woman who reached down, grabbed the shield and spear, and went running to join the fight. The one woman was the great Achilles in disguise. You can see here in this old mosaic, Achilles dressed as a girl in a pretty blue frock, soldiers grabbing him, as well as you can see a woman back here running away and some other soldiers, and there's that shield that he had grabbed to go fight. Now, having gathered all the Greeks for war, the Greeks finally set sail for Troy. And it is now that Helen becomes known by two epithets, Helen of Troy and Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But the trip to Troy wasn't a smooth sail. As you can see, the Greeks primarily relied on the wind to propel their boats. Oars were used for steering, quickly picking up speed to ram another vessel, or for getting on and offshore. The ships were also not very big. They were built for traveling short distances, since the Aegean Sea was riddled with islands. They didn't need to have large ships because they could island hop. Sail to one island, pillage, restock supplies, get back in the boat and sail to the next. Pillage, restock supplies, and get back in the boat, and so on. Essentially connecting the dots until they reached their destination. And it was on one such stop that Agamemnon angered the goddess Artemis. So on the way to Troy, Agamemnon, second in command to the Greek forces, you will remember he is Menelaus' brother. Menelaus is married to Helen. They stop at the island of Aeolus to resupply, and while hunting, Agamemnon kills a deer sacred to the goddess Artemis, and haughtily states that the goddess could not have done a better job of making that shot. Well, of course, the goddess Artemis hears this, and she punishes Agamemnon by making the winds blow the wrong way. The fleet cannot get off the island for months. Agamemnon consults an oracle and prays to the gods, and it is revealed that in order to appease the goddess Artemis, he must make a human sacrifice. But any old human won't do. Agamemnon must sacrifice his daughter to the goddess Artemis. So, this is Agamemnon's dilemma. Able to get a messenger off of the island, he can't really write home stating that he has to sacrifice his daughter. There's no way his wife, Clytemnestra, will allow it. So Agamemnon lies and has his messenger deliver a letter stating that his daughter, Iphigenia, must be sent to him so that he can, marry the great hero Achilles. Clytemnestra is so overjoyed with this news that she sends Iphie right away. But poor Iphie, when she gets to the island, she doesn't get married. Oh no, poor Iphie is killed in a jiffy. But hey, the winds are blowing the right way now, and Artemis is happy, and Agamemnon can continue on to Troy. Yay, they can go fight, right? Well, not so. Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, eventually finds out the truth, and while Agamemnon is away for 10 years at war, she cheats on him, taking a lover. And when Agamemnon returns home, having survived the whole 10 years of the war, he is immediately killed when he walks in the door at home. There is much more to this story, but I will have to tell you the rest another time. So here in this fresco, we see Artemis with her bow, the deer that is up in the heavens, the oracle who can't watch, oh no, and here is poor Iphie getting carried away in a jiffy to be sacrificed, and here is Agamemnon thinking, should I kill her? Yes. Here is an example of red figure pottery depicting this episode. See how the clay colors are reversed? You can see again the sacrifice here. You can see Artemis with her bow, and again, this is a secondary source depicting this scene. All right, so also on the way to Troy, things go slightly awry during another pit stop. While stopping at the island of Tenedos, Philoctetes, friend to Hercules, gets bitten by a snake. You can see his foot is bandaged here in this pot. The wound becomes so infected and smells so badly that the Greeks refuse to let him get back on the boat. They decide to leave poor Phil behind and continue on to Troy, for the assault cannot be delayed any longer. They abandon Phil on the island of Tenedos, leaving him to use his very special bow and arrows of Hercules to hunt for animals to eat. Everybody say bye, Phil. Maybe we'll see you later. Bye, Phil. Finally, we're getting to Troy. The Greek army makes camps on the beaches of Troy and try another embassy, which again the Trojans refuse to give Helen back. So the fighting gets started. And just in case you're ever on Jeopardy and you pick the daily double, you could answer this question with ease. Who was the first person to be killed in the Trojan War? Answer is a guy by the name of Protesilaus. He's killed by Hector, the leader of the Trojan army. All right, and for the first 8 years of the war, there's some pretty good battles, but most of the awesome stuff happens in the 9th and 10th year of the war, as detailed in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. As was customary after fighting or raiding, the warriors would take hostages, and Agamemnon, taking of one such hostage, angers the god Apollo. Ugh. Do you pick up a pattern with this guy? He definitely does not make people happy. So, pillaging a nearby village for supplies, Agamemnon and his soldiers steal from a priest of Apollo and take his daughter as hostage. The priest nicely asks Agamemnon for the return of his daughter, but when Agamemnon refuses, as you can see here, he's saying, "No, go." The priest prays to Apollo for help, and Apollo answers by sending 9 days of plague down upon the Greek army. Imagine everyone you know having the stomach bug for 9 days. Ugh, yuck. Now, trying to solve this problem, Achilles calls an assembly of the Greek leaders to figure out what to do. Agamemnon and Achilles quarrel, and finally Agamemnon relents and gives the girl back. But to spite Achilles, Agamemnon takes Achilles' slave girl as his own. Achilles is, of course, outraged by this, throws a temper tantrum, and refuses to fight anymore for the Greeks. And he goes back to his camp. Achilles then asks his mom, Thetis, to talk to Zeus and to allow the Trojans to start winning the battle. Now, why would Achilles do that? Maybe it's because he wants the Greeks to realize that they need him and he wants to have an apology. Well, the fighting continues without Achilles. Menelaus and Paris fight in a duel, and Aphrodite saves Paris at the last second. Ooh, that would have been a good fight to see. There is a version of this in the movie Troy. Later, Odysseus and his best friend, his BFF, Diomedes, go raiding, and they slaughter a bunch of Trojan allies and steal a bunch of horses because they're just awesome. But without Achilles, the Trojans are able to make it to the Greek ships and start setting them on fire. This is a big problem. Without their boats, they can't get home, they can't get supplies, you name it, problems. Patroclus, Achilles' best friend and cousin, begs Achilles to return back to the fight. Achilles refuses, though. His pride is too much. But he does let Patroclus return to the fight wearing his armor. Now, thinking Achilles has returned because his armor is so legendary, the Greeks start to win battles. Patroclus even kills Sarpedon, one of the leaders of the Trojan allies. But then, Hector, thinking Achilles has returned, challenges Patroclus to a fight. And with the help of Apollo, Hector, the Trojan general, kills Patroclus and takes the armor as a prize. Now, in order to give funeral rites, Odysseus is actually the one who rescues the body of Patroclus that has been stripped of its armor. Here you can see the gods up in the sky and all the battle and fighting continuing. When Odysseus finds out that his best friend and cousin has been killed, he goes on a rampage. His mom says, "Wait, don't return to the fighting just yet. Let me get you a new set of armor." And she has the god Hephaestus make it for him. Achilles in his divine armor, which, by the way, Homer spends hundreds upon hundreds of lines describing in uber detail. His shield is legendary. Achilles finally returns to the fight. After slaughtering many Trojans, Achilles is able to corner Hector, the Trojan leader, and he kills him, slaughters him. Now you think, okay, we're done. No. Achilles, so angry over the loss of his best friend, mutilates Hector's corpse and ties him to the back of his chariot and then drags him around the walls of Troy. Here we have black figure pottery. This is the entire vase on the left, and then on the right is a close-up shot of this section here, okay? You can see, here is Achilles with his helmet on, with his shield. Here's the body of the dead Hector. Right here are King Priam and Queen Hecuba asking for the body back of their son. because you have to understand this is a big no-no. You're not supposed to desecrate your enemies like this. In fact, you're supposed to honor them, even thank them for making you a better warrior. And you should absolutely allow the body to have a proper funeral. Achilles refuses and takes the dead body back to his camp. Then King Priam comes and visits the tent of Achilles, gets down on his knees and grovels for the body of Hector. You can see here, this is King Priam beseeching Achilles, sitting here all haughty. Achilles refuses to give the body back. Now this is a big no-no. Achilles should not be acting like this. Even though they're enemies, King Priam still outranks him, and you should still give your enemies some respect. The gods are not pleased with this, and it is at this point that the gods decide that Achilles is fated to die. But he's not dead yet. In the 10th year of the war, Achilles is able to go on some more battles. He kills Queen Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons. It's not the same Amazons as in South America. This is a different region from Africa. They were women known for their strength. And also King Memnon of Ethiopia. Achilles, though, is finally killed by Paris, the lover of Helen, who, with the help of Apollo, stands atop the walls of Troy and makes the shot of a lifetime. Paris shoots an arrow into Achilles' one vulnerable spot, his heels. Now, the Achilles heel, we have that region in anatomy, that tendon that stretches from the bottom of your heel up the back of your leg. That's a pretty important spot. And if your Achilles tendon snaps, you have to get surgery to get it reattached. And your foot is immobilized for months in a boot to let it heal. It's a big deal. But also, your Achilles heel is also a metaphor. It's a metaphor for weakness. It is the one thing that will bring about your downfall. Now, in real life, if you're shot in your heel, are you going to die immediately? No. This is one of those moments in mythology where it's that telephone game and things just get so blown out of proportion. What most likely happened is this. Apollo, on the walls of Troy, makes the shot, hits Achilles in his heels. His Achilles tendon snaps. He's unable to walk, falls down on the ground. And because he can't run away and fight on his feet, he's down on the ground trying to fend off the other Trojans and eventually gets overwhelmed and they kill him. But over time, this story gets shortened to Paris shoots the arrow, hits Achilles in the heel, Achilles dies. Now, once he's dead, Odysseus and Ajax fight over who should get the armor. And this is a pretty sad story about Odysseus that you'll hear later on. This is when Odysseus just, his pride gets the best of him and it doesn't paint him in a very favorable light. And that story you will hear another time. In any case, here's an example of red figure pottery. This is a black and white image, even though you have a red background here. You have the god Apollo standing in the middle with his hand facing towards Achilles. You have Paris over here on the side with the arrow. So Apollo is essentially saying, go ahead, dude, shoot him. And then there's the arrow pointed right to his heel. So, you think the war would be over, right? Achilles is dead, Hector is dead, the war should be done. Well, nope, we're not dead yet. Because remember the various prophecies? Wow. You remember Phil, our buddy Philoctetes, left on the island of Tenedos? Well, Helenus, a son of Priam and a chief prophet to the gods, is captured, and he tells the Greeks that they cannot destroy Troy without the help of Phil, who owns the bow and arrows of Hercules. So, Odysseus, who's very persuasive, he and Neoptolemus Achilles' son. Remember, like, whoa, he was an infant not, 5 slides ago? Well, time passes pretty quickly. We're in the 10th year of the war, and Achilles was on that island for a while. They go to Tenedos and persuade Philoctetes to fight in the war. Phil was none too pleased to finally now get off the island. He was happy to go, but not so happy to help the Greeks out. He was a little bit bitter about that. But this just tells you how persuasive Odysseus is, because then Phil joins the fight, and he kills Paris with an arrow shot from the bow of Hercules. So now you think, hey, all right, the fighting's got to be done now. The guy that started it all and stole Helen is dead. The war should be over, right? Well, no, we're not done yet. We have some additional trickery to capture Troy. You remember the Palladium and the prophecy that said that as long as the Palladium remained inside the walls of Troy, the city wouldn't fall? Well, one night, Odysseus and Diomedes sneak in to steal the Palladium. They're able to get it and sneak back out, but still the city didn't fall. And this is when Odysseus, pictured here, carrying the Palladium, devises the trick of the Trojan horse. Now, we don't have much archaeological proof of the Trojan horse. We have secondary sources because the horse was made out of wood, and we know that the city was eventually burned to the ground, and you should know that wood burns. So we can only guess what the Trojan horse looked like. Now, the trick is this. We know that the horse is built so extraordinarily large on purpose so that inside the Greek squadron can hide. And you can see in this pottery, you can see kind of the faces of soldiers popping out from the belly of this horse. Okay? So the trick is they build this horse from what wood they can scavenge from the shore and from some of their ships. They hide some of the Greek soldiers in its belly. The rest of the Greek fleet packs up as if it's gone home, but they really go hide on a nearby island. They leave one soldier behind. His name is Sinon, and his job is to make sure that that horse will get into Troy. Okay? So here's what happens. They build the horse, the boats sail away. The next morning, the Trojans wake up, and they look out from their city walls, and they see that the beach is deserted, all except for this huge wooden horse. Well, King Priam and some soldiers come out of the city to investigate. And among that crew is a prophet by the name of Laocoon. And he tries to warn King Priam not to bring this horse into the city. But in the meantime, Sinon is trying to persuade King Priam to bring the horse into the city. And Sinon's job was to lie and tell a very convincing tale. His story was that Odysseus said he was a traitor and he was abandoned here, and that the Greeks built this horse to honor the gods. And as long as the horse stayed outside of the city, the gods were going to rain destruction on the city itself and destroy the city. Well, Laocoon says, no, this guy's lying. Do not bring that horse into the city. Well, as they're standing on the beach arguing, along comes a giant sea serpent, and it eats Laocoon and his 2 sons. Well, this convinces King Priam that, maybe they should bring the horse into the city. The horse is so large that the Trojans need to tear down part of their walls. And this is done on purpose because they wanted to make it seem like they didn't want to bring the horse in. The Greeks are using reverse psychology on the Trojans. And once the Trojans had fallen asleep after celebrating their victory and getting the horse inside the walls, Sinon, who was granted passage into the city, sneaks over and unhooks the secret door in the belly of this horse. And the Greek soldiers are able to sneak out, emerge from the horse, and send a signal to the rest of the Greek fleet to come back. And they start slaughtering Trojans. You can see here in this image, the gate is open down here, because they had to tear down some of the walls. Oh, they left their front door wide open for the Greeks to stroll through. And the Greeks that were sneaking out of the horse, you can see them coming down on this line here in this depiction, and then racing along the walls here, and you can see some dead folks floating around there. Okay? The Greeks then brutally attack the Trojans. King Priam is brutally slaughtered by Achilles' son Neoptolemus. Odysseus, ensuring the Greek victory, throws Hector's son Astyanax off the walls of Troy. See, there was another prophecy that said if anyone of the line of Hector lived, that person would raise an army and come back and attack the Greeks. Now, it's not that Odysseus is a baby killer. He didn't run his own son over. But in this case, he will do anything to ensure the Greek victory. He grabs Hector's infant son, throws him off the walls, killing him. The women are taken prisoner. Helen is eventually returned to Menelaus, and Troy is set on fire. Here you have, from Jan the Elder, a Dutch painter, is the depiction of Troy burning. You can see here the city in flames. You can see just making out over here is the Trojan horse. And then you see a band of people running away, and this guy carrying someone on his back. This is the Trojan prince Aeneas. He is able to flee the city with some survivors, and Aeneas is carrying his elderly father on his back. Now, the story of Aeneas is depicted in Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid, which, if any of you take Latin, you have to read this poem. It's awesome. In Book 2, which is book means chapter, in Book 2 of the Aeneid, they depict the fall of Troy. Aeneas is able to escape the city. He then travels around the Mediterranean Sea, stops in Carthage for a bit, has an affair with Queen Dido there, and then travels on to Italy, where he becomes one of the mythical founders of Rome. Virgil wrote this poem to pay homage to Augustus Caesar, and it, again, does the same thing of glorifying how much it was to get Rome created. Okay? So, the city's destroyed. The Greeks return home. But the gods regard the sacking of Troy as sacrilegious. They think that the Greeks just went way too far in their destruction. And so they decide to punish many of the Greek leaders. It takes Menelaus and Helen 7 years to return home. They stop in Egypt for a bit and then eventually make it back to Sparta. Agamemnon, as I already told you, was murdered by his wife Clytemnestra when he returned home. And it takes Odysseus 10 whole years to get back to Ithaca. Now, this should make you wonder and stop for a second. Menelaus and Helen were the ones that started this whole thing. They only get 7 years? What does Odysseus do to deserve 10 years? Well, this is what you'll find out as we read the Odyssey. You'll find out why it takes Odysseus 10 years to get home from Troy. In the meantime, the legacy of the Trojan War, it is used as a story to highlight the greatness of the Greeks. It's inspired writers and painters for centuries, as you can see from many of the images I've shown you throughout this presentation. It exists as a large collection of different versions of the same event. There is no one definitive Trojan War text. It actually is a number of different stories from a number of different artists and writers. And ultimately, while it is interpreted as a heroic tragedy, it really is a love story and an anti-war tale. It tells you what happens to folks during war. So I hope you enjoyed the stories here and you've learned a bit. This has been the Trojan War Stories as told by Mrs. Baker. If you need to get in touch with me, you can contact me via email, kbaker@srsd.net, or tweet your questions to me at ktbkr4.